Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. This series features discourse on topics pertinent to the C-level conversation revolving the integration of artificial intelligence into the ever-evolving IT operations landscape. Discover trends and actionable tips for digital transformation, as well as the latest news on how AIOps is transforming business and government operations to create flow in their organization. And don't stay in the dark on the latest industry news. Join the AIOps Evolution community to stay connected and subscribe to the show at AIOPSevolution.com. Now, let's join our hosts, Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll, IT thought leaders, visionaries, and the voices on the other end of the mic for the latest episode of AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everybody, to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott. Host Bill, welcome, Bill, and happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday, Sean.
Yeah, looking forward to the weekend. So as a wrap-up, what we normally do is we go through a couple topics and a couple articles that we read over the past week or so that we found interesting, and then we'll also spend some time to talk about kind of the topic of the week that we've been thinking about. So, Bill, there's a couple articles I saw this week. I know you brought up something. One is around embedded machine learning, which I think is kind of cool. We'll talk about that. Another one is MLOps as an engineering discipline. I know that's interesting to you. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about, our main topic is AIOps deployments, why they're successful, why they fail, and we can. And I know you've spent a lot of time there. Sound good?
No, that sounds great. Let's jump
Awesome.
in.
All right. So the first article I read this week, which I thought was kind of interesting, it's kind of interesting, not so interesting, because it's 4 ways to apply machine learning to your data center, written by a gentleman named Subhankar Pal at Capgemini. Yeah. So I am not a facilities guy. I don't know if you are either. I'm a software network operations guy, so I don't know much about facilities management. But what really caught my eye in this article is this idea of embedding AI into hardware and controllers and chips and things like that, and how that's going to be kind of a big thing in the facilities management space, which makes sense. Like if you've got AI embedded in thermostats and power systems and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you said in the beginning it's interesting, not so interesting maybe, because I think it's a pattern that we sort of have always seen from client server, applications to, things being, distributed desktop applications, again, being client server, mainframe. And so I think that, with cloud, I think with sort of things became more centralized, and now we're starting to see, well, the cloud isn't really where we want compute to happen, right? And I think there's more and more devices, power systems, smart, power strips, the racks and facilities and the UPS systems. They're not just providing power anymore. They're computers as well, right? And so I think you're seeing the need. AI and machine learning is really going through the same transition we've seen other application areas where you start to push it out to the edge. Just like your phone. Now you have so much power on the phone. Now you're getting so much more power. You're getting compute power. You're getting storage, the ability to process. And I think, and the ability to phone home with connectivity. And I think we've seen pretty much all the telecom companies we've talked to probably in the last year. I think 5G, the kind of the convergence of 5G where everything's connected at very low latency. I think higher and higher compute being available on more and more systems and smaller chipsets. And then I think the algorithms being able to just get smarter, that decisions can be made out in the field because you don't need all of the information in the cloud. You just need localized information to make decisions.
I think what's interesting to me too about this, if you apply it into networking, right? And you start applying into your networking devices, your server infrastructure, your circuit boards, right? Where you're basically embedding AI to help in processing signals and doing processing, say, packet loss or congestion, and being able to automatically, almost at the hardware level, making AI decisions on how to reroute traffic, how to do self-healing and things like that. So I think the point of this is that we're going to be seeing AI kind of showing up everywhere, right? I mean, I think right now, when I think of AI and machine learning, I think about engines, right? And in one of my software companies, we are deploying machine learning using Amazon's AI machine learning engine. But we're now going to start, it makes sense. And then I think some of these vendors, they know how this technology should work optimally. So them being able to build those AI algorithms and machine learning into the chips themselves, embedded on their hardware, is pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's where the expertise lies, right? You can't expect, maybe an IBM or some big vendor to try to have the expertise in their centralized system, pull the data in and make these decisions and then send it back out to these vendors. These vendors are innovating, and now they have the compute power and they have the algorithms. Why not, have it be done locally? And they're really just reporting up sort of for overall executive function. So yeah.
So it's like super smart IoT, right? I mean, that's where we're going, right? I mean, now you've got a lot of IoT out there, and I've seen statistics that like IoT is going to grow 5 times over the next 5 years. And it's already like at 1 billion devices.
Yeah.
So you're talking billions and billions of devices that are ultimately just going to get smarter and smarter and smarter.
Yep.
And then we end up at Skynet, and the world is over. So
exactly. Good.
All right. So I thought, go ahead. I'm sorry. What?
Yeah, I was going to say with maybe transition to the next topic.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So you were
So
you were talking to me the other day about machine ops and things like, or I'm sorry, MLOps. So talk to me about that.
So it's interesting. I guess the first topic leading into the second, because the more you centralize anything, any kind of operations, any kind of data, you reduce the number of systems involved. You get more manageability. But we just talked about a situation where you're going to have, an enterprise or a telecom or, a large organization is going to have a lot of different vendors making all kinds of machine learning, decisions and taking action out in a very distributed way. And that kind of becomes an operations nightmare to some extent. And so this gentleman, Cristiano Bruel, I hope I don't think I pronounced his last name correctly, but he's a senior AI manager down in Brazil at a financial firm called Nubank. He wrote an article called "The Road to MLOps: Machine Learning as an Engineering Discipline," and he really did a great job of looking at machine learning as a whole, not just specific to IT, but just machine learning you see in enterprises as a whole, and saying we need to have a better discipline to this, and that we're not really bringing the best that we've learned on how to run applications in IT to machine learning yet. And he looked at it as really a convergence of 3 different disciplines. One is data engineering, which has been around a while; machine learning, which is kind of the newer sort of development of algorithms and writing as little code as possible, but that relies on the data engineering; and then DevOps, which was interesting. With DevOps being agile and being able to really manage pipelines, manage versioning, manage validation and ongoing monitoring. And so he talks about how the convergence of those 3 really need to come together into hybrid teams that manages really those pipelines, the validation, the monitoring, and just continues to look at improving and the code, both the code and the data. And so the article is very much broader than IT, but I think, being in IT ops for a long time, I've often kind of thought, why does IT operations go get its own tools to do things like monitoring, logging, data management, dashboards and whatnot, when there's more other general purpose tools out there that do this? And I think you see companies today bring in like a Grafana, Elastic that's used, and even ServiceNow, Splunk, it's used in a lot of different domains, but it's being used in IT as well, whether it started in IT or it started elsewhere. And I think machine learning is the same thing. And so my big takeaway was, maybe we should be merging IT operations application of machine learning to the broader applications of machine learning, and using the same teams, the same disciplines regardless of whether it's the business you're using it for, customer behavior, or running it as IT. So I was curious to get your thoughts, Sean, on do you see those general purpose tools being used more and more versus building very custom machine learning tools just for IT operations?
Yeah, so when I read the article, and I encourage our viewers to read this article, you should be able to find it in the margin somewhere on one side of our broadcast here. It got a technical, it got pretty technical in there, which was kind of interesting because it starts talking about the discipline of MLOps, and then it literally talks about machine learning and data testing and things like that. So it gets a little technical. But what I really found is this tie back into DevOps, right? And DevOps has really matured over the last couple of years into a real discipline on how to take applications and codify into the applications the concept of running an operation so that they run more effectively in operations. And it involves continuous testing and all kinds of things. So for me, the MLOps was really interesting because it kind of had this premise of coding is predictable, right? And that you can build test cases, and we do that here, with our coding. We're building the test cases as we're developing, so that when we do run our continuous testing, every evening, we're running against predictable test cases. Where when it comes to machine learning, it is in effect unpredictable, right? Because you're putting data into it, and that data, you don't necessarily know what's going to come out on the other end. You don't necessarily know how it's training itself and things like that. So this idea of now bringing data engineering into this is really interesting. And they're talking about the disciplines of version control of data, version control of machine learning models. So it's all very interesting. And I think that ultimately companies, when they do really start looking into this, is being able to build these hybrid teams of people who really understand how to build machine models, how people understand how to consume and version and data and interpret data, and then DevOps of how to make these things become operational. The challenge I see here, right, and what it kind of highlights to me is, in order to really take advantage, especially if you're going to roll your own, right, and you're going to do something like you're going to start rolling your own using machine learning engines, like I mentioned a moment ago, Amazon. You're now building kind of multi-discipline organizations, and that's complex, right? And some of these skill sets are pretty specific, subject matter experts, and how I could see large enterprises, very large enterprises, making big bets and kind of consuming the people for this. But what about, some of the mid-level enterprises, billion to 10 billion? Are they going to be able to attract the talent to do these and kind of make these transformational changes? So, it would be interesting to start seeing in the future companies coming out, vendors coming out with solutions that encompass kind of all this in there, and kind of a packaged solution about how to have the engine, how to do automated data engineering, and having disciplines and models and embedded in as part of DevOps. So I think we're years away from that, but this is, so
I think it goes back to, what you talked about AIOps as an evolution, right? It's not a tool. And I think that, this is very, this is a great example of that it isn't going to be this one tool. It's really evolving, and sort of the organization going with it. And I thought it was interesting. One of our telecom customers, they do agile sprint planning and sort of as a business and prioritizing, and they've merged their event monitoring team with an AI team and put them together to say, we've got to define some sprints and some plans and put some plans together to plan how we're going to kind of do the next generation of event monitoring, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I think that's that's a really good use case, right? Because AI machine learning right now is really a great use case is processing massive amounts of data and event management and monitoring. That's there's a heavy data intensive of use cases. So we're going to shift based on that because I think that's a really good shifting point to from how we kind of look at disciplines to really use cases to kind of our general topic that I really want to talk to you about. I know you've written some things about. We'll talk about. I think next week we'll highlight one of the things you've written about. We won't highlight you this week, so keep your ego in check a little bit. But so one of the things I wanted to just kind of generally talk about is why AIOps deployments are successful, why they fail. There was an interesting article written by a guy named Gab Menachem, and I think I completely butchered that name, and he's with ServiceNow. And we've talked a lot about this. AIOps as a strategy. How do you get going? What's your plan to get there? AIOps is not a platform, right? It's a journey, and it's an emerging thing. You're on this journey that is emerging around you, right? Yeah. But as you start jumping into AI and machine learning right now, what are some of the factors you should be thinking about? And one of the things that Gab mentions is kind of starting off is with a single use case, right? So in the case that you just mentioned, event monitoring. So let me, obviously, you and I talk a lot about this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, one of the the titles of the article maybe is why AIOps fail. I think it's too early to call things failures unless you're looking at failures in the kind of the positive sense, right? A fail forward. And, what did you fail at today is kind of a good question because it means you're learning and expanding, not that it's a big programmatic failure that the business is writing off. But I think AIOps very much falls into the companies are kind of stumbling forward, right, and learning from the lessons. And sort of that's where it is today. I think that, three things, a couple that tie back to what we already talked about, a couple to what you mentioned, I think are important considerations or factors. I think one is the centralized versus distributed. I think as you look at machine learning and AIOps, where you're going to apply it, you got to decide pretty early. And I think Forrester talks about this, that you got to decide, is it domain agnostic or domain centric? Do we want to solve the problem in a particular domain because the data and the problem is within that domain versus trying to make it part of a bigger solution? Or do you look at it as more domain centric and starting to define your problems and break down your problems you're going to tackle machine learning with in that kind of way? You mentioned, we talked about embedded AI. Does it get solved in the embedded AI? I think 4G talked about it, self-optimizing networks, the antennas and the radio access network optimizes the network itself. You don't bring it back into sort of the operations center to do that. And so I think defining the problem there. And then one of the things the gentleman from ServiceNow talked about was focus. And I think that is very important, right? Defining those domains and then defining the focus and be as specific as possible, solve a problem that then becomes repeatable versus trying to boil the ocean. And then I think the other key thing is I think IT ops, AIOps shouldn't go off and try to do this themselves without being part of the larger CIO organization that have been kind of breaking down some barriers as to how machine learning and AI gets applied. I think AIOps is a little bit of a laggard of taking AI and machine learning to the domain of IT management. There's a lot of lessons learned in other parts of IT that I think it's not a go it alone by the monitoring team that needs to figure it all out by themselves.
Yeah, I think I've always advocated, right, that you start in a particular domain and really understand what you want to accomplish. Because if you think of AIOps as a journey, right, you've got to build momentum. And there's a fair amount of people out there who are probably extremely uncomfortable with the term AI. And the reality is most people building an AIOps strategy is a visionary thing, right? You've got to be looking to the future, you got to be change tolerant. And most people are not change tolerant, right? And AI has all kinds of issues, not issues, but ramifications on organization and behavior and processes and things like that. All things that are very scary to people who've been working in operations for years and don't like change, because most people don't like change. So by starting small and looking at a very definable use case, building an ROI around that use case, you can essentially start looking at building momentum off of that. So when that works, in more of a kind of a minimal viable product, then you can start building on it and bringing more people in and seeing it and dispelling some myths, because people create a story in their head. I kind of made a joke earlier about Skynet, but people are like, oh, this, you're going to bring AI and you're going to replace my job. I'm going to be out of work. We've been talking about that in the IT or industry for a long time about how automation, replaces people. The reality is that the IT market career area has grown, still can't hire enough people. So it may require you reskilling, but you're not necessarily going to be out of a job. And so you can use these small use cases to kind of dispel these myths and create some incremental value, show it to your leadership, let them see what's going on. One thing about this article that kind of stuck me up front, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I thought it was a good article, but I do have a little bit of a challenge on one statement, is that, they basically said that people should take advantage of known methodologies and strategies developed by early adopters. How do you do that, right? I mean, like how do you, you want to be, and the funny thing is, it's like everybody's an early adopter right now in this stuff. Like literally everybody's an early adopter. And, so how do you get access to people who you're saying, hey, I want to start looking at this. Here's my use case. How do you find these people? I don't have an answer for that other than reaching out to, people like us, right? You call us. I mean, we can give you some ideas on that. We can also connect you with some of our clients that are doing certain things. But so that's a kind of a challenge I took out on. I challenged one statement that you had there.
I do think that I do think, one, as I mentioned, you got to look internally, right? Look across the bigger CIO organization and CTO organization, and even the business domains. A lot of times applications are being developed by the business units. They've probably done a lot. I think you can learn from there. I think, he's writing coming at it from a vendor. So he's obviously saying, we're a vendor. We have 6,000 customers. Come talk to us and we'll show you how other customers, and then obviously the consulting firms, have done a lot as well. So I think there are, but yeah, everybody's kind of an early adopter at this point.
Yeah, I would even say, though, I mean, quite frankly, I would even say ServiceNow is an early adopter in this kind of AI stuff, right? I mean, sure, ServiceNow is, multi-billion-dollar revenue company, but when you look at their AI technology, it's a very, very small sliver, right? So we're all early adopters, and I think that this, I think this is a really good area for people to really kind of reach out to the vendor community, right? Because there are a number of platforms out there that are very specific, focused on AI and machine learning. They're embedding those things. So it's a good way for you to learn to bring in that type of technology. It has a limited use case, but that works out pretty well. And then you can expand it from there. You may be looking at a platform for event management and monitoring, and 2 years from now, start looking at AI in chatbots or AI in customer service, which might be a separate platform. So then, but that's really part of kind of looking at AI as, AIOps as a strategy, because it is all it all is still evolving, and you're going to see AI embedded, AI in everything. You're going to see AI in automation platforms. You're going to see AI in event management and monitoring solutions. You're going to see AI in service desk, like ServiceNow and some of their virtual chatbots. as we talked before, you're going to see AI embedded in hardware, right? So AI is going to be, and machine learning is going to start ending up everywhere, right? And you need to kind of understand what it means to your organization. That's why, I always say AIOps is a strategy, not a solution.
And I think it starts with the business problems, the business challenges and business objectives. Like Apple, for example, is a huge effort on data center, power and being green, right? So that's a business challenge. They're putting AI and machine learning into their facilities management, right? To be able to make decisions and optimize. And so that's where it all starts from there. And then machine learning and AI is a tool now that you've got to look at the forefront of how do we use that to solve the business problems.
Yeah, good. Well, awesome. I think that covers it for the week. And great conversation. And I think we got some pretty good things to talk about next week. I've already been kind of formulating some ideas on that.
Everything I feel like we've covered it all. It just opens up more.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There's an unlimited amount of topics around this. So, anyways, Bill, great catching up with you this week. Have a great weekend, and everybody watching, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Friday for our next installment.
Great.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AIOps and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest episode.